Hi everyone, hope you're going well, looking after yourself and those around you. Dave here, back with another episode of Non-Toxic Bro. Today I want to tackle part 2 of burnout. So discussing a bit more detail about my experience with it. Excuse me. There's been two stages of my life where I experienced burning out, and then burnout being the most recent time. So both instances working as a senior manager in organizations, one as a senior manager in the banking world, and the other as a managing director of a small business. So in both cases I was probably exhibiting the same behaviors, and it really only dawned on me when I was doing some research for a LinkedIn article that I published the other day. I'll try and attach it to this story so you can have a read of that. But just the behaviors you start to exhibit as someone who's dealing with burnout, and certainly someone who's in a senior position in a business, how much of an impact that can have. So the decisions, and I've got the writing here on my right here on the laptop. So two big items were impaired decision making and damaged relationships. So in both instances I got to the stage of burnout. So that ends up, you end up making duty decision making being impaired. You're making more mistakes, poor judgment, inexperience, decreased creativity and motivation, become indecisive, lose confidence in your choices, and struggle with strategic thinking. Certainly in both instances, there was very much had a decision paralysis is I guess one of the big things I exhibited. Certainly, the ability to continue to be creative and innovate and look to the future became very hard when I was feeling burnt out in both organizations. The next one is damaged relationships, which is, I guess it's pretty big when you're you work alongside people for so many years, and you've generally got a common goal that you're working towards, and unfortunately when this burnout comes into play, that can have a big impact on it. So the things feelings you exhibit is your communication breaks down with the team, and with either your managers or your co-owners of the business. Empathy diminishes, trust certainly erodes. That was a big one for me in both organizations. I kind of fell out of love with the organizations and the trust for, I guess, my co-directors or management in the bank. And I guess for me, it was becoming very, very disengaged, distant, and just didn't want to be in and around those organizations or the people that were there. And unfortunately, that your fellow team members do notice that change, and it can have a big impact on the organization as a whole. I remember a conversation with my then boss when I was in the bank. He knew I was unhappy with some of the changes that had happened, and I'll always remember this conversation and respect him for it. It was like, Dave, you've either got to get over this and move on, or you have to leave. And I was like, you're absolutely right. I do see that. And I sort of said, look, give me a couple of months to make my decision one way or the other. And ultimately, I made the decision to leave the banks. And I still catch up with that boss, and I still apologize for how much of a pain in the ass I was to him for a good couple of months there. So he's a good man, and sort of, I guess he did support me through that time of my life. So I do really appreciate it. In that stage, I made the decision to leave. That was a decision I had to make, and that basically was the turning around of my burnout at that stage of my life. Wasn't in a great position. I left, started working from home for a few months and sort of, I guess, recharged the batteries, if you will, before the next career challenge came along. And that was stepping into ownership of a small business. And that was just a very, very hectic 7 years growing that business, dealing with business partners, dealing with mergers, rebranding, acquisition, lots of staff, several offices. There was a lot that we did in a very short space of time. It got to the stage where I hadn't been prioritizing myself for several years, been worried about, making sure the family and the home front were happy, business partners, staff, etc. were happy. And I was unfortunately the last consideration for certainly for myself and for others. Everyone just assumed I was okay and carrying on and doing whatever I needed to do. But that was far from the truth. So the analogy I learned, or I use, is it's around the like an athlete. You watch an athlete, their peak performance. I'm not saying I'm an athlete, but I'm just saying athlete peak performance. Playing through their season, a couple of little niggles, and then one day their hamstring just goes and they're rendered basically useless for the team. So the way I was operating is I was burnt out. It probably wasn't making the best decisions. I'd most definitely removed myself from the business, from the team. I've found it very hard to engage with my fellow directors and shareholders. Basically I got to the stage where I had to step out of the business. And that was there was one particular moment where I knew I was done. And that was, first board meeting of the year, about just over 12 months ago. Again, there were some conversations that were happening in that meeting, which sort of went against, what I thought my position was in the company. And that was the trigger to say, I'm done. And that's basically where I keep saying I've hit a wall. That's when I hit the wall where I could not make decisions. I had no energy. I could not face people. I think I stayed home for the bulk of the next couple of weeks, outside of seeing my daughters and my partner. I was very much just bunkered down. The physical impact was literally the shakes. Your nervous system is that cooked that I was physically just shaking and shattered, and emotional, plenty of crying, plenty of what am I going to do? How am I going to do? How am I going to get out of this? And look, thankfully from there, my business partners accepted my resignation, and over the next few months sort of brought me out of the business. But it really was a resetting of me as a person. I felt like I had nothing. I was starting afresh. I had zero energy, zero inspiration, zero motivation for anything. Couldn't cope with basic decisions, outside of my daughters. I think I've said before that when it came to my kids, that's where all my energy went, and that's sort of all I could muster during that time. It took several months to get out of my own head again and start to think a bit more about the future, which was great. A lot of what I was feeling was like I'm not being productive. I don't have a purpose. Therefore, I'm sort of less of a person, less of a man, if you will. So, big part of, I guess, those first 12 months of dealing with the burnout was trying to, find purpose again in my life. A few hurdles along the way, but certainly feeling a lot better now. I'll talk a little bit more about, I guess, the journey, I guess, since I hit that wall, and the ups and downs, and I guess what I've done now to to be able to move forward and get a bit of purpose back in my life. So yeah, look, hopefully that gives you a bit more insight into what I was feeling. And I guess from the research, it's very true. You just lose confidence in yourself, your decision making. You just want to withdraw from business situations, and literally the thought of being in those situations makes you sick, anxious, physically shaking. You just can't think clearly or deal with it. So it's not very nice. I wish I hadn't gone through it. I guess twice. So that's on me, I suppose, the second time around. But I'm hoping that the third time there won't be another instance of burnout like I've experienced in the past. But look, that's enough for me and this episode. I'll check back in with a bit more around I guess burnout and moving forward next time. But as always, like, share, subscribe, all the rest. Hope you're doing well, and look after yourselves. Cheers.